Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of DoubleDM podcast. I am, as always, your host, Emil, and I am joined by my co-host, Niels. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I can't complain really. I mean, the sun is coming out again here in Germany.
Yeah.
It's getting a little bit more sunny here, so that's good.
However, a week ago we still had snowfall.
Yeah. It's still cold, but at least it's sunny. I just know I want to see the sun more, not just this gray mass of clouds above. So yeah, good, actually. Bit anxious about my upcoming exam, but yeah, that's not going away until
it's
end
going
of March.
away until the exam is done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and studying for that is something else.
Why?
It's not my kind of course, you could say. It's more of a abstract way of explaining how things work rather than just calculating and finding the right formulas for the specific task, but more of how does this machine work and why does it work that way. For chemical analysis, it's
the next time you have to write why does the machine work, you also just add to the question and how does it feel.
Yeah, just a little essay in the exam if you have the time. Just write how the machine feels. But how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yesterday I was at kendo practice. And right, kendo practice, especially in the off semester time when we are not having study courses or whatever and it's exam season, the kendo courses work a little bit differently because they're a little bit longer than the usual 1.5 hour courses, but they are only one course. Normally we have 2 1.5 hour courses back to back, one for the beginners, one for the advanced class, and now we have just the advanced class for 2 hours. So a little bit more training, a little bit more focused training with people that actually want to do the sport more or less correctly in armor and with real gear and stuff. And I got home, showered, went to bed, and now in Germany we have something that is a special period from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. that basically says you're not allowed to be loud in that time frame, right? You're not allowed to suddenly start drilling something into the walls or hammering in a nail or whatever else, right? You're not allowed to be loud. That's how it works, and totally respectable because, right, that's the time most people sleep because most people have to get to work at like 7, 8 a.m. So they have to get up at 6 or something, right? So it works. However, I'm the type of person that like goes to sleep at like 1 a.m.
Same here.
Right? I'm not necessarily too loud in the instances from 10 p.m. to like 1 a.m. My neighbors might disagree. Some of them have. But those two are total hypocrites, if I dare say so myself.
Beautiful.
The others are completely fine. They are also up for a long time. So my other neighbors are all cool. Very cool, actually. However, I got woken up at like 9 a.m. So I slept for quite some time. But I was feeling exhausted from kendo practice and didn't want to get up and just wanted to sleep for like half an hour longer or something. But someone decided to use their saw, their mechanical saw at like starting at 8 a.m., right?
Oh boy.
They are totally allowed to do that.
Yeah.
I still subscribe to the notion that you shouldn't start this kind of loud work
before 10
a.m.
Yeah.
Because if it's 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. and you want to do the drilling and sawing, you can also wait till 10.
Yeah, exactly.
I would never get the idea, even if I am up at like 6 a.m. to start doing bullshit before 10 a.m.
Yeah. I get that, and I completely agree.
I also wouldn't drill something at like 9:30 p.m.
No, I think the perfect time to drill or to saw or to whatever, to do any sort of loud construction work, preferably for me, would be between 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. Something in those hours would work great.
Like, I understand most people maybe are at work, but who the fuck wants to drill or saw something before they go to work? No one does that shit.
Exactly.
Again, I totally get it. Like, the thing is, it doesn't happen often, right? So it's not necessarily that big of a deal, and it's kind of like a very minor problem. But it's still something that makes me go, oh. can you just wait for another 30 minutes, please?
Yeah, it's noises just when you wake up. It's just, I hate it.
Yeah.
This one night this week, actually, I was just sleeping peacefully, and randomly at 5 a.m. my smoke detector thought, hey, that's a good time to call a smoke alarm.
Not just without the battery?
No, it was a complete on full smoke alarm. And there was no smoke, nothing, nowhere.
These new high-tech smoke detectors, they also don't just detect smoke, right? They also detect smell. Mm-hmm. Different particles and waves in the air or whatever, right? For example, if there's an electrical fire, there is not necessarily much smoke. Yeah. But you can distinctly smell it in the air if there's an electrical fire. For anyone who doesn't know, if you ever smell burnt fish and you are not burning fish right now, that's an electrical fire. And get the fuck away from it. Yeah. Right? These smoke detectors would also detect that. So something has set them off, and if they are set off, it's so fucking hard to deal with them sometimes.
Yeah, but I dealt with it. And then I slept only for 3 hours before. And then, oh no, the battery is empty. Every 15 minutes, alarm peeping from my smoke detector. So I didn't get any sleep that night except the 3 hours until 5 a.m.
But why didn't you just rip the battery out of it and said, fuck it?
Because I don't know how to get it off this fucking ceiling.
Okay.
I tried pulling, I tried turning, I tried everything.
Oh, is it one of these that are mandatory installed?
Yep.
Yeah, those are tricky because they are drilled into your ceilings.
Exactly. But now I don't know why, but it stopped with the battery noise. This was just until 7 a.m.
One fun thing is when I lived with my parents, this law came about that you have to have the mandatory smoke detectors. We already had smoke detectors in our house. Mm-hmm. And then the person came that had to inspect this and look, okay, are there smoke detectors here? Looked at the smoke detector outside our kitchen door and said, I can see you have one that works for the kitchen. Yes, that would work, but I have to install a new one anyway. And since this one is installed here, I have to install it in your kitchen. He installed it in our kitchen, and not 5 minutes after he left, we just ripped it out of the wall. Because that's just idiotic. Because, right, he saw that we had some installed, but he had to install some anyway. He was ordered by his employer and by law to install smoke detectors in our house, even though we already had some. But they don't fucking care about that. They need to install their own ones. Mm-hmm. And since we didn't have the exact same as them, because we had a little bit older ones, he had to install new ones. And this was such a dumb idea.
Yeah, it's bureaucracy. Can be very fun.
We've talked for long enough about how shitty our nights and how shitty sometimes it can be. Yeah, first world problems, obviously. How did you enjoy TTRPGs this week?
I did enjoy them very, very much. We had a session on Tuesday, and I have a session with the same group and the same campaign today, right after this recording, you could say. And we are playing in a campaign based around a book series. That's very cool. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to play. And usually the sessions switch between just lore dumps, and role play, amazing, to intense combat. And they alternate between each other. It's a good mix because every type of character that you created, everything is viable in basically every session, just on a different scale, you could say. And yeah, that's a lot of fun for me, at least. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And objectively, nothing much happened on Tuesday, but I still wrote down a shit ton of notes because I write down everything. Hey. But yeah, that's been my TTRPG week. Nothing major, but yeah. And for you?
I had a session on Tuesday, and I also have a session on Thursday coming up, right after this recording. No, on Tuesday we played Tyranny of Dragons. I talked about it in the last few recaps, but my players had recently taken into their own custody Varam the White, a worm speaker of the Cult of Dragons, or the Cult of the Dragon Queen, rather. And now they finally got to interrogate him. And they got all the answers that they were hoping for, I think. They got all the questions answered that they had. And now they finished the first chapter of the Rise of Tiamat book.
Okay.
And we'll now be going to some other place. There's one adventure right set up for them, which is the Sea of Moving Ice, where they will fight a Rauathor. I don't know. Dragon names in D&D are the worst fucking thing ever. Who the fuck decided to name a dragon a Rauathor?
Yeah, I don't...
Like,
yeah, but...
A Rauathor.
Okay.
What the Rauathor? What the fuck of a name is that? Yeah, I know dragons' names should be magical and mystical, but this? I need a fucking pronunciation guide for that one.
Yeah.
And that pronunciation guide is a full fucking book. Like,
just for that name.
My one strife with the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, really. I can look past bad chapters that I can just rewrite, right? But what I cannot look past is the fucking names of the dragons. Like, I understand that these names should not sound like Earth humans or something, but what the fuck? Make them pronounceable.
But to be honest, a ancient red dragon called Bob would be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, in my home game, in my home campaign Min, I subscribe to the notion that dragons have very, very long names. And humans just use a short abbreviation of their names to actually address these dragons. Because I subscribe to the notion that I, for example, took from the Dark Eye, that dragons are such intelligent, mystical, and magical beings that they do not speak in 3 dimensions. They speak in 4 or 5 dimensions. Yeah. They speak in a way that humans just cannot grasp, and their names would be the same, right? If their language has evolved beyond just speaking words, but rather showing images in your head while they speak and showing multiple images at once at the same time, or saying multiple words at the same time. Yeah. Their names would be no different. And that's what I really love, because I can just make these dragon names very long, very complex, and say, well, yes, that's the dragon's full name, its actual dragon name, but no. Normal mortals do not use this kind of name. They abbreviate the name to like Arams or Leskar or something, but not to Arashashashahalaha.
Exactly.
They aren't able to pronounce this because they cannot make the sounds that the dragons make to actually pronounce the name. Yeah. The Forgotten Realms, however, just say everyone speaks common, and there's that therefore the dragons also speak common, and their names in common are this. And I'm like, blah, please, no. Please, no. So yeah, that's able to happen, and we will see if it does.
Yeah, can't wait to hear about it. Again, I can't wait to hear you saying the name again of the dragon.
No, Rauathor. I've seen a tweet recently on my timeline on Twitter that said, DMs, please try to pronounce the names of the characters correctly. And I'm like, yeah, I try my best, but also please make your characters' names pronounceable.
Yeah. If you have a character named Rauathor.
Yeah. Like, I don't want you to name them Bob or Alice or something that is obviously pronounceable, that we can. But when you create your character, please say the name out loud 3 times in a row to yourself and see if you can actually pronounce it well, or if you maybe just say, okay, no, I need another name. Yeah. I have nothing else for this week.
Me neither.
So we should dive right ahead into our episode on splitting the party, why you should do it, and also why you shouldn't do it. Hey listener, how are you enjoying the show so far? Tell us about it in whatever way you see fit. Go to our social media pages and add us or DM us about your favorite episode of the show. We would love to hear from you on what impact our show might have had on your home games. Or you could review us on your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice message with a 5-star review. And if you want to go above and beyond, bring a friend into the fold. Tell them about our show and refer us to them so they can get a piece of the pie as well. Thank you for listening to DoubleDM and joining us on this incredible journey. So, Niels, recently my players entered a dungeon in our Tyranny of Dragons game. It was the Tomb of Daedarius. Some people that have played the game know that tomb probably. It's a simple dungeon. Front part is a snake, mages, divination dungeon, divination temple. And the back part is a UNT snake temple that has been built behind it. And it's fun because they were in one of the rooms and we have a warlock with us that can cast Dimension Door. And the player likes that spell a lot because it allows him to get away out of every situation basically and get into every situation he wants to. He can go around every single wall I put in front of him as long as he knows that there is something behind it.
I like that spell as well. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a good spell. But he used that spell, and since he's a warlock, he obviously upcasted to the highest level that he can currently cast. By his level, he can take up to 2 other people with him, and they are a 4-player party. So he said, I'm just gonna take the fighter with me behind this door and disappear. So he grabbed the fighter by the hand, the fighter was on par with it, and then they said, see ya to the others, and disappeared. And went to a different part of the dungeon, like they were supposed to get there at some point. But the door that they wanted to go through right now was destroyed. There was no path through right now. No direct path. So they just made one. And the others had to go around, right?
Yeah.
And now that's something that a lot of people often always say on the internet, everywhere. There's a lot of memes about it, that you should never split the party because that is just gonna get to danger. The other 2 players then had to go through the whole dungeon because they had no teleportation spells available to them. So they had to go through the rest of the dungeon. There was a few rooms with quite hard encounters for only 2-player characters of level 9 that already have some of their resources burned. So if they had initiated any fights, they luckily didn't. It could have been that those 2 just died.
And I think that's the reason why a lot of these memes came to be with the never split the party, because suddenly if you split the party in half, basically turn down the power level of that party down by half.
Yeah, you just make 2 parties that are only half as strong as before.
Exactly.
I mean, this meme comes out of the old days of D&D, of old games of TTRPGs. It's not something that has been around for just a few years. It's been around for a long time because a D&D or advanced D&D or one D&D first, second edition were dungeon crawl games where you were supposed to go into dungeons and try to survive this very, very deadly trap-filled dungeon. Right, that was the game that people played back then. Nowadays it changed a bit, totally fine, but then it was supposed to be this dungeon is gonna kill you at every corner. If you suddenly split the party in half and go left and right, both parties are gonna just have a double harder time at each single trap, at each single monster, at each single thing. And it was very common that in that time to die when you split the party because it was a mistake. It was considered a full-on mistake.
I mean, if there are traps or something like that, and the split happens with the split, it happens that the character that is proficient or very good at detecting and countering traps is split from the party that encounters traps. So they have basically no tool against that. I
mean, right, the thing is just that back in those days, I never was in those days, full disclosure on that front, but it was deadly. I know it was deadly. Everyone says it was deadly, and it was deadly. The game, when you look at the game manuals for that time, it just looks like the game was out to get you. And that's some people's enjoyment of the game. I mean, if at every corner death awaits, you have a suspenseful game. You have a fun, if that's what you want to play, you play that and that's gonna be fun. And splitting the party in that instance, in a dungeon, in a situation of always danger, is a mistake. Simple as that. And I would even go as far to say that what my players did, splitting the party here, was somewhat of a mistake. It worked out fine for them, so I'm not gonna say they did something bad. right? I'm not gonna be out here saying my players did something bad and I should punish them for it, because I shouldn't punish them for it. If they get punished for it, that's on the table because of how the dungeon is laid out. But they teleported somewhere else and the others had to go around and potentially activate traps, go into combats that they weren't equipped for anymore.
Yeah, especially with the situation that you described in the beginning, can be really tough if you know at least somewhat what the dungeon before looks like, but then teleport to a completely unknown location where you don't know how anything works. Because in the situation you described, there could be a complete different set of traps, enemies, or whatever that you don't even know yet, because you battled through this dungeon up to this point and know what has happened to you, and therefore can kind of assume what will happen in a couple of rooms that follow that. But if you completely just jump into a new part, that changes.
It does. The thing is that if I as a DM obviously know where they are teleporting and know what dangers lie ahead, what traps lie ahead and stuff like that, I have no problem running both half parties through this dungeon, right? One of the things is that maybe this is something that other people don't do, or maybe I am completely with the majority here, but I will not change my dungeon for my players. No. I will not. If I prepare that there's a trap here, or if the dungeon manual, for example, because I played Tyranny of Dragons where the dungeon was laid out for me. If that says here's a trap that if you do this, you activate it, and then this happens, and then this has to be done, and then that damage is dealt, I do that. Exactly. Because, my players decided to activate the trap, they have to deal with it. I make sure that all my traps are at least somewhat discoverable before they are set off, because I think that just allows more engagement of the game if my players have the chance to discover a trap. If they don't, obviously, they still activate it and still the thing happens and they have to deal with the damage they get or with the conditions they get. But if they are able to see the pressure plate before they activate it with a high enough perception or with a high enough trap detection check, sure, I'm going to let them pass the trap. Yeah. But the dungeon will never change just because my players decided to do something that maybe might throw off the encounters and completely annihilate either part of my party when they get to there. For example, there was one room in there where there were 6 mummies inside this room that would attack if the players did something specific. My players exactly didn't do that, but I think that if they had activated all 6 mummies, those 2 characters would have died in that room. Yeah. Because they would have been surrounded, and maybe they would have been able to the fight would have been able to be winnable for them. So they had the abilities to dispose of all these mummies quickly. But that just burns resources. And that's also one thing that, right, in a dungeon, you don't want every combat to be deadly, because these combats are supposed to burn resources before a boss fight, for example. Exactly. And splitting the party, I'm going to say this for players. If you split the party, you're going to burn through more resources more quickly. Yep. And again, if the dungeon is supposed to be very deadly, and especially in all the editions it always was, and you had less at your disposal anyway, again, splitting the party is a mistake because you had less available and you had to use more to overcome the deadly traps. Exactly. Splitting that just means that you even have to spend even more than you actually have, and you don't want that. And even in D&D 5e, the game suddenly becomes very deadly for these players, because suddenly you don't have a tank anymore. You don't have someone that can actually in melee combat face these mummies, because the 2 players that went away were a warlock and a fighter. 2 melee combatants in our party, right? The warlock uses a blade, and the fighter uses also a blade, and they both are melee combatants. And they fight on their own way, in their own ways. And the other 2 were the casters of the party, a sorcerer and a wizard. Oh, yeah, okay. They don't have the capabilities to actually tank these mummies. Like, they were quite buff both, because we have an abjuration wizard and a draconic sorcerer. Those 2 are very tanky, respectively, for their class. Yeah. But they are not a fighter. Exactly. It's still, you can, when you split the party and have your casters split from the melees, you can achieve the same power level or the same damage numbers as a party of 4, but you have to use higher level resources that you might need later on. You can't just get by binding all the mummies in melee combat with the melee combatants and use your cantrips to spare some spell slots. Now you have to burn through all of those. I can say this. The thing is that they didn't burn that many resources, actually. But I can, for example, say that my players are very much at the end of the dungeon and just had a very big combat because they triggered the whole dungeon. Because they didn't decide to be stealthy. They didn't play smart. And in that instance, I'm gonna play my enemies smart as they are. They're gonna set an ambush with as many troops as they can. And now all those troops have been disposed. But my players are at 1 HP, no spell slots, at 10 HP and only 2 spell slots left, at 30 HP and not a single fighter feature left, not a single battle maneuver dice anymore, nothing. Or a warlock with 10 HP and 1 spell slot left.
Yeah.
They have still some resources available to them, which is 3 spell slots, nothing else. And there's still a boss fight to be done.
Yeah, that's gonna be a hard one.
That boss is not gonna let them long rest in their dungeon. So the thing is, my players have burned all their resources, and now the dungeon, as it is not finished yet, is gonna take its toll on them. And when I'm just here to give a few dungeon advice, I think that dungeons are supposed to, if your dungeon is populated with a boss monster at the end, you want that boss fight to be as deadly as possible for that dungeon, right? Yeah. If there's a red dragon in your dungeon sleeping or something and protecting the hoard of gold, and there's a lot of traps built around them, these traps aren't necessarily built to kill. They are meant to burn resources so the dragon can kill. Right? Or at least on a metagaming level. Your dungeon isn't supposed to kill your players at necessarily every site, at least in my opinion. Right, if you play a D&D or first edition or whatever, and that's your style, go for it. I wouldn't like to play in that, but that's me. But my dungeons are meant to really lower your resources until you get to a point where you actually would have needed those resources.
Yeah, that's the way I build my dungeons as well.
And my players know that. But they also have to burn their resources to not die at this specific point in the dungeon, right? They have no chance but to do it. And that's the thing. It becomes a resource management a little bit. And I like that in my dungeons. I like that my dungeons make my players think about what to do with their spell slots, what to use their features, when to use their features, and stuff like that. But going back to never splitting the party, right? It just means that you burn through more resources, but also, positive, you cover more ground.
Yeah.
If you think as a group, as a character group in the game, that you should be splitting the party because that means you can cover more ground and you have the resources for it and will be able to survive it, however wrong that may be as an estimation from the characters. But in roleplay, yeah, go for it. I'm gonna say this. Go for it if your characters would do it. Because, hey, don't we all like it if the game is a little bit more dangerous and tense?
Of course, it just pumps up the suspense a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just fun. We don't want our characters to die necessarily, right? Because that means that, at least for this dungeon, we are more or less out of the game. But a little bit more suspense that we can handle shouldn't be a problem, right?
Yeah, can be an amazing tool to use or to work with when your party actually splits the party. Because you can go into a bit more detail about a single individual in the same amount of in-game time, you could say, and highlight different players. You can turn the spotlight on different players because every character has a specific skill set in whatever TTRPG you're playing. And if you split the party and everyone gets to do exactly the job that they want to do alone or in a smaller group, that just enables the telling of tales after that when you reconvene in a tavern, for example. When the stories fly left and right of how awesome that character was, or how amazing that character was, or how insanely bad this action went. This can happen in a group, but from my experience, whenever a whole group is together, they try to compensate on the fly. But when they are split, they don't necessarily have the time to compensate on the fly, so they have to figure out other ways. And therefore, a lot more roleplay is encouraged after the fact, and a lot more quick thinking. Because if the lock picking character is in a different group and you stand before a locked door, you have to think about a different way to get in. My parties usually split when there is a really specific time clock when they have a specific timing that they need to achieve for a quest.
Thinking about it, right? Looking at this, timers is one of the few instances where I would probably say never split, at least from a player perspective, because what if we need the whole group at a given moment in that time frame? Then we just lost. But right, at the same time, we can also say, what if we don't split and then don't cover enough ground in that time frame? But a timer is basically something the DM can put on the table to raise the stakes, with which they can basically press down on their players and say, well, you have to move now. And that question of what do you do now that I've given you extra stakes, given you extra tension, that moment obviously makes players result to quicker actions, to quick thinking, like you said. And in that moment when someone says, okay, we have to split up, no one is gonna object and start discussing them on the implications of if that's good or not.
Exactly.
I use timers in my games for all things. Sometimes I use them in combat. Sometimes I use them outside the combat and stuff like that. But every time I do, I have a number of sand clocks of hourglasses, ranging from 30 seconds to 10 minutes. And I put those on the table. And when that clock is through, I pull the clock away and say, okay, now the thing happens. Now this happens. Or now your decision has to have been made. And right, just putting the clock down basically ensures that my players are gonna act.
Yeah.
Because I often only put the clock there, even if in-game there is a timer, for example, to simulate to my players, you've been discussing for 20 minutes what to do. You don't have 20 minutes in the game to do that. Now, make a decision, please. I want to give you enough time. I want to give my players enough time to have room to explore their characters and the options they have. But I also want them to actually do something, because I know that if they are just gonna sit there and discuss and discuss and discuss and discuss and try to find always the best way of action, it's never gonna be as fun as if they just try something, and that critically backfires on them because they triggered a combat or something, but they're gonna have fun in that because, haha, we made that happen, we did something and something bad happened to us, but we can still best the challenge, blah, 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 blah. But if they're just sitting there thinking 30 minutes on how to proceed to the next dungeon room, those 30 minutes are just gonna feel wasted to them all at the end.
Yeah, that can lead to, if you have too much time, it can quickly lead to decision paralysis in many instances. Yeah,
especially in a game, right, where you have relatively a lot to do at your disposal. There's a lot of spells in D&D. If you're a spellcaster and you have a spell list of 25 spells or something, or you have prepared a few spells, right? You have 10 spells prepared, and you have 3 potions at your disposal and 2 magic items, and you have also your class features and stuff like that. And then you also have theoretically all your roleplay capabilities that are not necessarily reflected in the game. That's a lot of options already. And now you're thinking about, okay, with the information the DM gave me, what do I think I could do with each and every single option, and what do I think is the outcome? And that already means that for each option, you will have to think about that option for a little bit of time. That's how you end up at thinking along for your plans. And again, I like my players making plans. I just hate it, and I know that they do that too, when they look at their plan and say, that is good enough, and one says, but what if? The thing is that people have to realize there's always going to be roadblocks in your fun. It's important for TTRPGs to face challenges. If your game is going to go flawless, why are you playing?
Exactly.
You don't have to roll dice if an action goes flawless. Right? Every TTRPG says dice are meant to resolve conflicts, points where you don't know the outcome. So if your plan is flawless, you won't roll any dice. And now look at this. Why did you sit down to play a session of D&D if you haven't rolled a single dice roll the entire session? Why did you say we play D&D? I get 4-hour roleplay sessions. I get those. I love those as well. I love them. Trust me. But that's not D&D. That's improv theater. If I sit down with the intention of never rolling dice, I'm not gonna play D&D. If you invite me to a D&D session, I'm gonna bring dice.
Yes.
If I don't get to use them by design of the session, like if that happens on occasion, that's fine, right? If the session evolves into a role play session, that's fine. But if I get invited to play a TTRPG and never get to engage with the TTRPG, the session is gonna feel not like a TTRPG.
Yeah, something like this happened to me in one of my campaigns, where actually we split the party and it turned out to be a complete roleplay session. There was only one dice roll that was a perception check, but we split into two groups. One basically went shopping and searched for information and asked around. The other went to their family to say goodbye. And we split the party to just because no one wanted to go to every single stop. But we just role played for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Still with splitting the party.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's totally fine, right? It's because the session evolved into that. It was never planned from everyone to never roll a single dice check in the session, right? Exactly. But if that's the plan, if the plan is, hey, let's play D&D, but don't roll any dice, I'm going to look at you and say, okay, why do you have to specify that it's D&D? Just say, let's meet up and play improv theater. I'm going to have the same fun, but I'm not going to expect D&D.
Yeah, it's a bit about expectation management in that.
Yeah, but right, the thing is, if you make a plan, I want you to actually execute the plan. And if you execute a plan, that means you will roll dice. Because that means you will face challenges. If you succeed, your plan goes further. Your plan proceeds one step. If you fail, you have to suddenly improvise. Like in every fucking good heist movie, they at some point have to improvise. Because that's next to the planning stage and executing stage, the next fun stage. The improv stage.
Oh, yeah.
Something unexpected happens. Now you have to react. That's fun. And if that wouldn't happen and everything went flawlessly, I'm going to just say this. The movies would be outright bad.
And a good thing that you mentioned heists, because I think heists are a perfect example of when it is insanely good and needed sometimes to split the party at some point.
Yeah.
Because you have to be at different locations at the same time to enable each other in most heists. And therefore, you need to split the party to give everyone not only their spotlight, but to enable the plan that they made.
Yeah.
Is usually, at least in my experience, a lot of fun when everyone at the table is basically on at a different point in this heist, but they get to listen in what happens at the others without being able to react to that immediately. Just the look on the other players' faces when they see or hear that their other mate just fucked up and now has to improvise and just flails around in their mind to not knows what to do until the repercussions of that reach the other players.
But that's especially important what you just said to splitting the party in general.
Yeah.
It's an out of game thing, but the other players have to wait while the others are playing. That can be a bad thing. It can be a good thing. It's once again about balance. Because if you have a 4-hour session, let's say your party decided last session right before you ended the session to split. And now you have 2 parties, 2 players that have to play. At best, you will give each party 2 hours of the session. But they're all gonna still stay for 4 hours. So you can't just make the first party's gonna play 2 hours, then the others are gonna play 2 hours. Because then you could just say the first party leaves and then the second one comes in. So no one has like 2 hours of time where they don't do anything. But you split, right? You split your attention. You work 10 minutes with this party, then 20 minutes with this one, then 30 minutes with them, then again 20 minutes with them and stuff like that, right? And then you give each them the attention that they need for the current moment. And now, first of all, when we think about that, I think most people would think of that as a negative, because a lot of people would think of that as a negative, simply because there's a part of the table that is currently not engaged in the game. And I agree 100% with you. But in the game, these two things happen simultaneously. And outside the table, first of all, I'm still engaged in seeing what happens to the other player characters. So at least I'm still listening to what's happening. But you're right, I'm not that engaged. I might get bored a bit. But oftentimes when I switch the attention to the other party once again, it's not because I'm finished with a room with the others. It's because they hit a challenge that they have to think about how to solve. For example, I give them a puzzle, right? I read a riddle or hand my players a riddle. And then I switch to the others and play with them while they solve the riddle.
Yeah.
So that when I switch back to them, they had 20 minutes to think about their riddle. And in game, their characters might have spent 20 minutes figuring out the riddle. But at the table, they're not going to block time with those 20 minutes thinking about the riddle.
Exactly.
So it's a lot of time management. And I will say this is harder to do than when a full party is together. So if you as a game master don't want to switch around constantly, once again, you're allowed to tell your players, please don't split the party. I don't want to deal with that. If your party thinks about it. Hot take, but you as the DM are allowed to say, please don't do it, friends. This is just going to add more work to my workload here at the table right now. I don't want that. I have already a lot to track. Please just stay together. I can promise you that you're going to be able to do everything you want to do. And boom. Right? Yeah, hot take. Don't break character or whatever. I don't give a damn. If it's for the fun of the whole table, do what you gotta do.
Exactly. And I think one thing that you just mentioned with the solving a riddle, when your party is split and one part is solving the riddle, it basically gives them the quiet time, not needing to act right now, to quietly and more efficiently, in quotation marks, solve the riddle, because they don't have to act or react to different things that happen right now around them anyways.
Yeah.
Because they have the riddle in front of them. They can take the time that they need to solve that riddle. The others can take a bathroom break, for example.
Perfect. Well, yeah. Good example, actually.
Because if you don't need to react to certain things, you should always listen. But if you don't have to speak or act and you really have to pee, just go in that moment. It's a perfect thing without breaking the flow of the game at all.
Who cares, right?
Yeah. Or it can be a smaller role play moment for the other two. Because if the party is split, one is having all the action, the other two are just sitting in a tavern without knowing what is going on. They can just role play during that shit.
Yeah.
It's always about how you fill this non-attention time, basically.
Yeah. And
there are a lot of options to do.
And you as a player are allowed to fill it in the way you want to. For example, when we split the party in one of our recent games, and then stuff happened to each of us, and our GM often switched over to the next character after something like a cliffhanger. There's a giant snake in the room. Boom. Next player. Then switch back to you. Okay, giant snake in the room. What do? You had enough time to think. There was a lot of suspension. Oh, fuck, a giant snake, right? You don't have all the information, but you have enough information to formulate some kind of first reaction.
Yeah.
And then it also gives you time to look at the other players and see what they are doing. You have the time to think about what you want to do, but you kept engaged because at every single moment the GM can switch back to you and tell you, big snake, what do you do? Right? But as a player, if you suggest splitting the party, I want you to do that if you think that your character would suggest that. But I would also like you to, as a player, to think about the implications, what that means for the gaming table you're at.
Exactly.
Please think about this and what it means to split the party, because it means that the DM is only one person. They can only focus on one part of the party at any given point in time. That means that if you split the party and I say as a DM, okay, I will delete you from the battle map. For now, you're gone. I'm going to talk to the other two until I find a point where I can talk to you guys. You have to deal with that. And I will say this, you have a lot of options to fill the dead time and you can mitigate that. But it's sometimes people will still get bored because that's not what they signed up for. They didn't want to wait to play the game because someone split the party. But that's just what happens. And again, think about that before doing it. Because if your action in-game, this goes for every single action you can do, not just for splitting the party, it's going to disrupt the fun of the table. Think about it twice before actually doing it or suggesting it. Because suggesting it might still be fine, because then you can just open a discussion with the other player characters, with the other players and the DM. Like, I think of doing this. Do you guys think that that's a good idea, or do you guys don't like that idea? I know. Yes, it's metagaming, blah, blah, blah. We had an episode on that, why that isn't bad. Go listen to that if you really are here to whine about metagaming to me now. But if your action is maybe disrupting the fun of the table, think about it twice, because why the fuck are we playing this game if not for the fun outside of the game?
Exactly.
I am not playing this game so the character in the game can become the greatest hero that ever lived. I'm playing this game so I can have fun playing someone that becomes the greatest hero that ever lived.
Exactly.
I'm not there for my character. My character is there for me. And that's one of the steps that I have to realize. And that's why every single decision I make as a character also thinks about how that will affect the table. Like, sure, sometimes it might feel very detrimental to the table, but it still will make fun for everyone. And that means that it's not detrimental anymore. It's positive. Everyone likes it. It's fun. Boom. That's the reason I can do that action, in my opinion. And that's the reason why I will do the action, in my opinion. Because everyone's going to have fun. I will have fun. It will advance the game in some way. And that's what we all want.
Exactly.
And if that's splitting the party, I will split the party each and every single time.
Exactly. It's just, like you said, advancing the game itself is a huge thing when it comes to any decision-making process, basically. Because if you make a decision that doesn't advance anything, why did you take that action in the first place?
Yeah.
And even classical role-play moments where nothing really happens to the story itself, it still advances the game because you as your characters evolve through that. And so can be splitting the party. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And if it does, if it advances the game, go for it. And I think especially with when you just play your characters that way, splitting the party at some point will happen eventually.
Yeah.
Most of the time, at least. In my experience, every party that I've played with yet has at least at some point split the party to some degree.
Yeah.
One went off on a shopping trip. Don't know why, don't know when. It happened a long time ago, but whatever. Or they just split the party to cover more ground, to search more in the library, to search someone in the city, or whatever, right? It just happens eventually at some point when you think about what advances the game the most, in the most fun way. And yeah, just experience-wise tells me most of the time it can be a lot of fun when you think about it as what advances the game actually. Yeah,
and I want to go back to that it will happen eventually, because I have to agree. With given enough time, it will happen eventually. There is, in my opinion, also a lot of options for GMs in a lot of games to just split the party in some way or another. One of my favorite ways to split the party, it's a little bit of a DM fiat and a little bit of I have full control, my players don't, is something like a teleportation. If I tell my players before that, it can go wrong, and it might be that you do not end up in the same place as each other. That's foreshadowing I have the ability to split your party if I want to. The GM can initiate the splitting of the party, or the players can. And I think both options are valid, because when the GM does it, it's because of a very specific reason. It's not just because I want to split the party, right? That's not the reason. The reason is I want to split the party because whatever comes after that.
Exactly.
And that's a good and that's often a good reason, because it's because I want to advance the story, because I want to do this, because the villain has tampered with teleportation across all the realms. Very cool campaign starter for a high-level campaign, actually. Players are heroes that have availability to teleportation spells, and all teleportation spells are messed up now for some reason. And they have to find out why. Write that down somewhere. If you just look at this, that there's a lot of times and a lot of options where the party can be split, it is gonna happen eventually. And especially if the players initiate it, they're gonna do it at a point where they feel comfortable doing it, right? Right, for example, in a city. I don't have anything to do with shopping, but we have to find this person, so I'm gonna look for the person where you go on the shopping trip. That's a very low stakes splitting of the party. But it still means that if now something happens to either part of the party, the other isn't there to help. It's still a moment where in a very low stakes environment, theoretically, the danger is very high all of a sudden, if you think about it.
Yep.
But again, we talk a lot about danger with this, because never splitting the party is about danger. It's if you're comfortable with the danger around you, to split the party, and splitting the party would be a good thing, you will do it. And you as a player should do it. But as a DM, if your players do split the party, play into that. Make sure that communication between the two is cut off. If at the table, right, make sure if your party of 4 is split into 2 groups of 2 players, make sure that those 2 groups do not communicate any game things between each other anymore. Make sure that they all have the attention at the moment where they are in the play on the game, and then play into it a bit. For example, right, with the traps. If there is a dungeon filled with traps and the trap person gets separated from the others, then play into it that don't change the dungeon, right? Don't change the dungeon, but play into it. The trap person is still going to have no problem with the traps, but if the others run into a trap, focus a little bit more on that trap. You don't have to change anything, but just focus more on it, because now all of a sudden your trap becomes useful again. And how fun is that?
Exactly. Just putting the magnifying lens on a different part of the dungeon then for this specific moment.
Yeah.
To enhance the fun of the whole game, because now suddenly you have a completely different set of challenges for that for those characters. Someone can go through walls. Cool. All right. That's a challenge for you most of the time, but it can be depending on what walls, blah, 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 blah. Because the party has a trap person with them, traps aren't a real thing. Then the trap person gets removed from that situation in one way or another. Yeah. Suddenly, the going through wall part isn't that big anymore, but the trap part is. And then you magnify on that. You play into it. You describe the traps a bit more, describe the dangers a bit more.
Yeah.
Without changing the mechanics of the trap itself, just describing and the way of engagement with that trap is changed. But the mechanic itself is.
Yeah. Or for example, if the high intelligence wizard or artificer or whatever, the lore person of the group, right, that is supposed to do the history checks or whatever, the smart one is in one side of the group. For the others, lean into that there is very important lore written on the walls, that the relics that they find are so good and belong into a museum, right? Stuff like that. Show them that if the other were here, that would be important to them. That would be great for their character. And another game, for example, that does this very well, to go a bit away from D&D, is for me, after playing it tomorrow, since we are playing it tomorrow, Cyberpunk, because there's only one character class or one character role that can go into the net running space.
Hi there.
If that group gets split and the others suddenly have to deal with a net running space, they're completely thrown into cold water. Same goes for the med tech. Healing others in the field isn't necessarily one that only that class can do or that role can do, but they are the only ones that can deal with critical injuries. Inflict a critical injury on someone while the medtech isn't there, and you're sure to fuck up that player character. And that's the way to fuck up with people. But splitting the party doesn't have to always raise the stakes for player characters, or it has to be always mean more danger or even mean death. It can also be used to highlight a specific player character, right? If you have, for example, a little bit more of a quiet person at your table, and you know that this is not just because they're scared to do decisions or something, but rather because the others are just more dominant people at the table. When you split them and give that person their alone time to do what they want to do, they can do that and gain more confidence that way. Obviously, if you put someone into that situation that doesn't want to be in that situation, that doesn't have ideas and depends on others because that's how they play, you don't have to split them necessarily, because that's then kind of pushing down on them that you don't want. If you have a quieter player because the others are just more dominant and other are just faster in saying their ideas, and you always see this player, I have also a good idea, but yours is good as well, let's just do yours. Give that player some quiet time alone and let them do their thing. Make sure with splitting the party that everyone gets their highlights. Give everyone a specific challenge for them. For example, if you just give everyone their singular challenge, if you give everyone their own spotlight with splitting them, you focus attention on them. That can be good for some players because that means that they have more freedom in what they want to do. The others will not criticize their ideas and plans anymore. They can just do them and then they work. And that gives them so much confidence to bring forth their plans the next time around. Right? If you have a player where the ideas get shut down from the other players a lot, splitting them for a short time to do their own plan for a bit and showing them that their plans work and that you engage with them and that you are sincere with their plans is going to give that player a lot more confidence to play.
Oh, yeah.
But also, obviously, you can challenge them individually. For example, if you have this kind of mindfuck dungeon or something, like an illusion dungeon, like a magic dungeon, a pure mage magic dungeon where the players players get split and then get tested for their greatest fear or something. It's a specific challenge for that character. The others would have no problem besting that challenge. But this is now a challenge for that character alone on how to overcome their weaknesses or their fears and become a stronger character after that. And that only works if they're alone. And after that, the player is gonna feel so fucking badass and cool.
Oh, yeah.
That single feeling that player has no price.
Exactly.
It is infinitively more valuable than anything, basically. It's a great moment for them. And you as the DM feel great as well because you enabled your player to do something great.
Exactly.
And that's what we want, right?
Yeah. Just having fun, feeling great, and through all the tools that are at our disposal. And splitting the party is one of them. You just have to be aware of the positives and the negatives that splitting the party can do, and to see if it is good in the situation or not, and weigh out the positives versus the negatives. To see if you, even if, as a DM or as a player, should try to split the party right now. It's just a game of evaluating.
Yeah.
A game of balance.
It's once again this thing of just think about it a little bit more than you would usually do. And oftentimes you have done enough thinking for it to find out if it's the best decision in the moment right now for TTRPGs, right? We play TTRPGs very instinctively, and that's great. But sometimes if we just spend a second to think about the stuff we're doing, we might see a better way to do it. And that better way is gonna pay off. That single second or the single minute you thought about this is gonna pay off with way more fun at the end.
Oh, yeah.
So why not take that few seconds to think about this? But with that, I think the advice is split the party if you think it's a good thing to do. Make sure that you don't split the party if you think it's a bad thing to do. Have fun.
And with that, thank you for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DoubleDM. It appears you liked this one. What we had to say and our advice helped you. Why not show us how we helped you in a rating, or even write a review detailing us how we helped? You can do this on the platform that you are listening on right now. It's just a few clicks, doesn't take long, and helps us out. It gets us out there and our advice into more ears of more people. Thanks again for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. Have a great day, and hear you on the next one. Bye-bye.